Hebrews chapter 12, we'll start there at verse 1. I was reading this chapter earlier in the week. In fact, I thought about it last week, and there's a movie, most of you have seen it. It's called Forrest Gump. And I went back on YouTube yesterday, and I looked at a couple of little segments of the movie Forrest Gump, and kind of put an urge in me to want to go and watch it all over again. When he was a little boy, and the kids, because he had the calipers on his legs, and the kids were throwing rocks at him because he was just a little bit delayed in his learning and all those sorts of things. And I watched this little girl saying, "Run, Forrest, run!" And he starts off with the calipers, and he was going and going and going, and they're chasing him and throwing rocks. They get on their bikes and chase after him, and you hear this little girl, "Run, Forrest, run!" And the calipers eventually fall off, and then he can run real fast. And of course, goes through the movie, and then you hear it a few times, "Run, Forrest, run." Well, this morning, let's take Forrest's name out of it, and you put your name in there, okay? Run, Rian, run! He's 40, he can still do it. But all of us, and that's what it is this morning. Run, Christian, run. And this is what the author of this letter is bringing us to. We've learned what faith is. We've touched on that in chapter 11, verse 1, where we see the definition of faith. And then we've gone through that chapter, and we've seen this great list of Old Testament examples of living by faith. And that's all good and well. We read about these guys, and ladies and so forth. Remember towards the end last week, I just quickly read through what more shall I say, for time would fail me. And I didn't realise that it did fail me. I went a little bit longer than I should have, and I apologise for that. But you know what? We've learned about these great heroes, if you can use the term, but examples of living by faith. But what are we to do with that? What are we to do with that? And we get into chapter 12, and we find out what we're to do with that. And what we're to do with the knowledge that we have of these Old Testament heroes. This is one of those reasons why some say that the author is Paul. Because in Paul's letters, he brings you doctrine, then responsibility. He lays out the truths to you, and then puts the challenge to you through an exhortation to apply. And so some say it is. And I'm not saying it is or isn't, but because the Lord has chosen not to let us know. But we get into chapter 12 now, and there is that real challenge to us to do something with what we know about these guys who have been living by faith. In other words, there's a consequence. To whom much is given, much is required. The knowledge that you get from God, and this is you can look at it any way you like. To me, it's an upside, but the more knowledge you get, this is the joy about being in a fellowship of believers, where one of the major distinctives is learning and studying the Word of God. Because the more you know, the more responsibility there is. The more there is a reason for you to be aware of it and to live by it. And the author is bringing us to that place where there is a consequence of the things that we learn. And so right up front in verse 1 of chapter 12, he says, Therefore, in other words, on the basis of what we've just been hearing, on the basis of what we've just been learning, that's out there, is it all right? No worries. I'm a little bit sensitive to mobile phones. But he says, therefore, and so what he's doing is he's bringing us face to face with our response to the examples that he's been talking about in the previous chapter. You know what? He's been writing about these guys who have been facing a lot of difficulties. There's been a lot of persecution. It hasn't been easy to turn away from the religious rituals and to follow by faith this one person, Jesus Christ. Knowing that now that he is a high priest. And so they've had many reasons or excuses to pull away from this new way because it's difficult, it's hard. And maybe not to follow too closely to the Lord. And it's no different today because you and I, praise God, not you, I'm sorry, you are strong and spiritually mature and everything is fine. But for some Christians, you know what, it's easy to pull away because when it gets tough out there, one of the first thoughts in our minds is let's pull back to a comfort zone. And we prefer to pull away. And, let's be honest, I'm sure we've all felt that way sometimes. When we got close to the Lord and there's that intimacy with the Lord and you just know that, man, if this is not the mountaintop, this is really close. And I'm enjoying the presence of the Lord and His Word is just opening up to me and this is a great place. Let's, as Peter said, build our tents and stay here. It's just one of those. But you notice that there are times when that happens that the enemy comes in. And, through whatever, it could be through work or family or whatever, but we get to that place and there is a real temptation, just back off a bit, and then they might ease off. I can still be a Christian and still have my salvation secured, but I'll just let the temperature cool down a little bit because it's getting tough. I know Christians who have done that, who've got out to the very peak and, there's another term I'm learning to despise, the cutting edge, whatever that is, To me, the cutting edge is where you just cut yourself and you bleed to death or something. Why do you want to go to the cutting edge, But they use the term. But, getting right out to that place and that pinnacle of relationship with the Lord, but the enemy comes in and then it gets really tough. It's just easy to take back a little step and go, I'll just cool down a little bit here and it won't be so heavy on me. And that's just what the enemy wants. And of course he starts to win. And so the author is saying to us that these Old Testament saints, they've gone through tough times. They've kept the faith. We ought to also keep the faith. Keep walking close with the Lord. Therefore, he said, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Of course, he goes on to say, looking unto Jesus. So you'll notice that he connects us with the Old Testament saints, because he says, therefore, we also. So the author includes himself, and he also connects us with this as well. And I think this is the Lord saying, you know what, it's not just those Old Testament saints, it's you today, 2011. We also, since we are surrounded by the cloud of witnesses. And so I like that. He's saying to us as well this morning, you know what, you need to link yourself to these Old Testament saints. They had faults. They slipped and they slid around, but their faith in God remained intact. And we have our times and our struggles, but we can also have the same, of walking in faith the same way. So we also, he said, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. That word witnesses, you go out to witness, or the disciples were witnesses, and we use that word witness. It's the word martyr. Die to self. Live for Christ. It's the word martyr. And it's like you get the picture of the Colosseum. You remember that movie, the Aussie guy was in it, the Gladiators, the big Colosseum, and you realise it's just a little part and their computers made it look really round. Oh, they cheat. Why waste your money going to watch the movies? It's all fake. But you know what? But can you get the picture of the Colosseum and the crowds, And that's the kind of picture that we see here, the people just looking down at the event that's taking place. So he says, seeing that we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Now he's not saying, and I know, the illustrations have been used many a time, and I guess in a way it's not hard, but it's not bad to do it, but it's not correct to do it either. They are not just looking over the balcony of heaven now and looking at us and going, yeah, you know, what are we, and trying to get us to walk with the Lord. They're not watching, but their testimony bears witness to us. That's what he's saying, a cloud of witnesses. They're not looking at us per se. Otherwise, then we would assume that everybody gets to look at us. You know, you hear this, the saying with somebody, well, whatever a name, I better not say a name in case it's one of your relatives, but, you know, that they're looking down at us, you know, now I sense that they're looking. No, they're not. No, they're not. And, you know, and we have this little description, you know, these witnesses, these Old Testament saints looking. They're not. But their testimony bears witness. And that's the witness he's talking about here. We're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses by the life that they led. And that's what should spur us on. They bear testimony to what it is to live by faith. They bear testimony to what it is to live trusting the Lord and believing in the promises of God. Even though they didn't see the result, the end result, they maintained their trust in the Lord. Such a great cloud of witnesses. So the author is letting us know that, you know what, in the eyes of the Lord, these guys get credit because they stayed true. They remained strong. I did say we would look back at it last week, but I'll just mention it quickly. But in verse 38 of chapter 11, it says, of whom, talking about these saints that we learned of in chapter 11, of whom the world was not worthy. I love that. Of whom the world was not worthy. You know, the world condemned them. Today we've got people who live in a way and make statements against us as born-again believers, and they in a sense try to condemn us. But in condemning us, they condemn themselves. You know, the Richard Dawkins of our world, you know, are condemning themselves by the way that they try to condemn us. And then you could say in a sense, you know what, the world isn't worthy of us. And that's what he's saying. These guys walk with the Lord. Well, hey, we need to have an attitude to walk like that, you know. The world is not worthy. And so, such is this great cloud of witnesses. He says they're a great cloud of witnesses. He doesn't say a cloud of great witnesses, because they did have faults. But it's a great cloud of witnesses. And on that basis, their testimony let us follow through that. In spite of their tough lifestyle, in spite of the meagre existence by worldly standards, you know, they had great stature according to God. And I think that's the important thing. So he says, you know what, we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. On that basis, you know what, we ought to run with endurance, or run with patience. The word is endurance. And it's one of those words that is like a key word through Hebrews, and especially through this chapter, is endurance. It's mentioned a few times. Run with patience, or to endure to the end. It means to bear up under trial. It means to stand strong under the pressure of the toughness of life. You know, and life is like a race. And it requires the determination. It requires the resolve to just keep on going. Even when the pressures come against us, keep on going. Run with endurance, he says. Abide under that pressure with some stickability. Stay there. Stay true. Maintain a discipline in your own life, even though that there are the difficulties and there are the pressures, because eventually there is triumph. That's the kind of mindset that these endurance runners have. I love watching them in the Olympics. You know, they get out there and they've got the mindset. You can see it. It's almost like you try to talk to them, but man, they're focused. They got a mindset. I've got 30-something kilometres to go, or whatever it is, and I'm, you know, must really double it. I don't know, but they, you know, they have this mindset. This is the start. The finish is there. Focus. Wow. And so the writer is saying to us this morning, you know what? Get that mindset. Have the mindset of these guys of chapter 11, that you'll just remain and endure through the race that is there before you. We've got this cloud of witnesses around us who have borne testimony. Now he says, endure. How do we do that? How do we endure? Because sometimes it gets tough, doesn't it? Sometimes it's a tough thing to walk in this Christian walk. The enemy knows how to come in, and there are just tough spots as we walk with the Lord. The first one, he says, hey, we lay aside every weight. That's what we do. That's the first thing that we're to do. Lay aside every weight. One thing you learn very quickly in distance running, I was never a professional, but I used to enjoy it in Albany. I used to do a bit of running. Is what you do is you wear the attire that has the least resistance, so that you can run and have the freedom. The lightest weight. Some of the shoes I've got now is a lot better. You pick them up and they're just like, they're so light. Those shoes, they're amazing. And that's what they do. They get the least resistant attire to wear, so they cast aside all those weights. Just sometimes they get up and they've got their jackets and all on, and then just before the race they remove all those things that would cause difficulty in running. So they lay aside the weight so that they can run freely and run the distance. They work hard to build up that endurance and that strength. But when it comes to the day of the race, they wear the lightweight clothing and so forth. And their bodies are lean and trim like mine, and they can just resume, Thank you for the vote of confidence in that. The allusion here is to the long garments that are worn in the eastern countries, the long robes and all, and which if they're not laid aside or tucked up, they get in the way. I'll give you a scripture in 1 Peter. He said in chapter 1 verse 13, "Wherefore gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought into you at the revelation of Christ." And it's the picture he has is of those robes, and they bring them up and they tuck them into the belt so they can run, so they're not impeded. And that's what he's saying here. How do you endure? Well, you tuck up so that you're not impeded, or you get rid of the weight. He says, lay aside the weight. Now, the weight is not necessarily something that's wrong in your life, but it does impede you or restrict you in your walk and your relationship with God, or your run with the Lord. It may become an encumbrance simply because it takes up a lot of your time. It eats into your time so that you are restricted in what you can do for the Lord. And he says, lay aside those weights. Because those things make it harder for you to run or to follow the path that Christ has set for you. They're things that may delay you in your walk with God. Things that just impede your spiritual course or growth in the Lord. They may be hobbies that have kind of just taken over, begun to control you. They may be, whatever, not necessarily a bad thing, but it does impede you. So the writer is saying, hey, listen, so that you can run with endurance, put it aside. Lay aside that weight. If we're going to be effective in running the course that's prescribed by Christ, we've got to just get rid of those things that will get in the way of those impediments. I know that there are many people, who watch the Olympics or watch the footy, whatever, and they dream of, I'm out there, I'm tough. And, as a young fellow, when I used to follow the footy, if the team lost, invariably it always did, you'd go to bed at night and you'd dream almost, this is what I would have done, and to be the great sportsman. But the reality is a lot of people want to be that sports person, or they want to be that academic or whatever, but they're not prepared to pay the price. You heard it right. I wasn't prepared to pay the price. To endure the disciplines that are needed to be successful. Sure, there are a lot of people who want to, or Christians who want to walk with the Lord. They want to, be the Billy Graham. They want to be the person that is used greatly by God. They want to do that. But when it comes to the discipline, they're not prepared to do that. And so they live a life of mediocrity as a Christian. And they miss out on all those other blessings. And they are not as effective as a fellow labourer, simply because they're not prepared to discipline. Paul speaks about discipline. He speaks about the fact that we need to train ourselves. He uses those metaphors and to put aside and to train properly and with purpose. But a lot of Christians aren't prepared to do that. A lot of Christians want the benefits of what Christianity brings. They want to be used. They want to think that they're really at this place with God where great things are taking place. But when it comes to disciplining themselves in their flesh, crucifying it, they're not prepared to do that. And so they don't see the great things. They don't see the blessings that God has. They don't see the great things that God can do through them, because they're not prepared to discipline. The writer here is saying, hey, listen, you know what? I want you to run the race with endurance. The first thing you've got to do is put off the weight. Put off the weight. Lay it aside if we're going to be effective. But you know what? Isn't it true, that so many earthly things get in the way? So many earthly things. But the writer is just saying to us this morning, put it aside. Put it aside. Think about it now. Think about it. There's something in your life maybe that you think, wow, that would give me more time. I could really settle down and just wait on the Lord, and that if I could just put that aside. If I could just, sit down with His Word open and meditate and just pray and just spend some time in the presence of God and say, Lord, speak to me and just give me God. But I've got to do this. I want to do that. I want to lay it aside for a little bit and allow the Lord to speak. There is a second thing He says you've got to do if you want to run this race with endurance. And He says it here, He said, lay aside the sin which so easily ensnares us. So He's talking about the sin that easily ensnares. And the picture here in the Greek language is that of a sheep, in the Middle East, sheep everywhere, kind of thing. But it's a picture of a sheep with its wool, and it's gone close to the thorns and got tangled with the thorns in amongst the close-knit wool of the sheep, and that's the picture. So he says, you know what? The sin that easily ensnares or entangles us. Doesn't sin seem so easily to entangle us now, Just a little thing, maybe an attitude that creeps in, and then you try and get rid of the attitude. Oh, it's hard, or you get something else that creeps in and you try to get rid of it. It's, it easily entangles us. It may be like that sheep we've just brushed past, and it's just got you. He said, that sin that easily ensnares, man, we've got to deal with that. We've got to get rid of it. You ever seen those plants? I watched a couple of weeks back on TV. They've got the beautiful looking flower and it's open like this, and it's got all these sharp little spikes, and then you see the insect, and the camera, I don't know how they do it, but the camera comes in, and it smells, it's nice, and the insect lands and starts sucking up the nectar or whatever, and it's getting all really, and then, got it. And you know what? Sometimes that's like us, even we get caught up in the sweet nectar of something in the world, but you got to be careful. Entangles us. And so he's saying, you know what? We've got to make sure that we don't allow ourselves to be entangled with any of those sins. But he particularly says, the sin. The sin. You notice that? The sin. Now, for you, whatever the sin is that keeps you from God, you've got to deal with it. It's a sin that entices you away from doing something and doing things with the Lord. It's a sin that tempts you away from